When Senator J.D. Vance called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett ghetto on live television, he likely expected an angry outburst. Instead, she remained composed, stared directly into the camera, and delivered a response that made history. The atmosphere was already charged, tense and expectant, before anyone uttered a word. 4 individuals sat at a sleek glass table, the studio lights bouncing off both their skin and their unease. The discussion was meant to center on economic recovery in underprivileged areas. But as often happens in live televised panels, the conversation veered off course. Senator J.D. Vance did what he's known for, talking over others. He leaned into the microphone, his trademark smirk fixed just below a furrowed brow, projecting the image of being the most rational person in the room. "Let's be honest," he said, gesturing dismissively, "throwing money at failing schools. And calling it reform? That's not real progress." Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had remained mostly silent up until that point, not due to a lack of opinion, but because she understood the rhythm of such panels. Let the others falter. Then, respond with facts. So she waited patiently. Then she leaned forward. "If by failing schools you mean those that are chronically underfunded, understaffed, and neglected by state leadership," she replied, "then yes, let's invest in them, because communities that have been systematically stripped of resources deserve restoration." The host shifted slightly, sensing a shift, but Jasmine continued, "You mention handouts, but what you're really saying is, if it doesn't look like your version of America, then it doesn't matter." That's when it happened. J.D. Vance interrupted her, his tone sharpened, his eyes narrowing. "You're just being ghetto," he said. The comment was quiet, almost offhand, as if it were just another casual remark, but it landed hard, like a stone crashing through a pane of glass. The mood shifted instantly. The other guests froze. The host blinked twice. Viewers at home paused mid-meal. It felt as if a million TV remotes were dropped at once. It wasn't simply the word. It was the delivery, as though her entire identity had been reduced to a slur, masked as commentary. Still, Jasmine didn't react emotionally. She took a measured breath, adjusted her mic, and looked into the lens. "I'm not surprised you said that," she began, her voice steady yet sharp. "Because when Black women speak confidently, when we question authority, we're not seen as strong. We're labeled." Vance shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing too late that he'd crossed a line. "You hear ghetto, but what I hear is South Dallas," she said. "I hear perseverance. I hear my mother juggling 2 jobs, raising 3 children, still attending PTA meetings, with food stamps in her purse and pride in her stride." That was the moment the internet exploded. Even before the broadcast concluded, clips were circulating. Tweets, shares, stitched videos, subtitles, it went viral within minutes. Some hailed her as a queen. Others thought she should have walked off. But many, especially Black women, simply said, "Thank you." The panel tried to move forward, awkwardly pivoting to student loan reform. But no one was really listening. The public had already tuned into one defining exchange. Jasmine maintained her composure for the rest of the show, but her hands revealed the tension, fingers tapping the tabletop, signaling the words she withheld. She knew better than to give them the reaction they were hoping for. She refused to become the angry Black woman they anticipated. Yet her message had already struck a chord. Across the country, from Oakland to Tulsa to Tampa, viewers sat upright. Women who'd been called ghetto at work, during school, pickups, or in conference rooms felt that familiar sting behind their eyes. This moment had moved beyond politics. It was rooted in something older and deeper. It was about the labels that persist, even when you graduate, succeed, or serve as a member of Congress. And Jasmine Crockett? She stripped that label away on national television, with poise and unwavering resolve. What most people didn't see was the journey that led to that moment. Before she was Congresswoman Crockett, she was just Jazz. No spotlight, no security detail, no custom-tailored suits for television. Just a slender girl with rough hands from helping her uncle fix cars under the blazing South Dallas sun. South Dallas didn't offer gentle lessons. It didn't speak softly. It handed out experience in its rawest form. You either learned to speak up or got lost in the noise. Sirens, screeching buses, arguments on street corners, mothers yelling for their children before the streetlights. Came on. Jazz lived two lives, the world inside her home and the one outside. Inside, her mother Marlene ruled with quiet authority. She didn't have to raise her voice. A single look could alter the atmosphere in the room. Marlene cleaned homes in Highland Park 6 days a week. She'd return with aching wrists, bleach burns on her fingers, and just enough strength to cook some chicken and rice before collapsing on the couch, still wearing her church socks. Outside, their home, Jazz had to walk a careful line. Being smart but not too much, real but never too real. She wore off-brand sneakers that were a size too small and used a gel cap for her edges that made her scalp itch. Still, she held her head high. She learned early on that many mistook resilience for attitude. Some teachers focused on her tone instead of her message. She noticed it even as a child. When she gave the right answer, a few people looked irritated instead of impressed. Her first experience being called ghetto didn't come from a classmate on the playground. It came from a substitute teacher, 4th grade. Jazz had stood up to explain why Martin Luther King Jr.'s work wasn't over, even though the worksheet claimed mission accomplished. The teacher chuckled and said, "Well, aren't you a little firecracker, real ghetto fabulous?" Jazz didn't even know what that meant at the time, but the tone made it clear it wasn't a compliment. At home, she told her mom, Marlene didn't storm into the school or write a complaint. She simply said, "Next time, finish your thought and say it louder." That was all the encouragement Jazz needed. In high school, she joined the debate team, not because she liked arguing, but because she was tired of people acting like her thoughts needed translation. She wanted to master the skill of saying things clearly and powerfully, in a way that couldn't be brushed aside. She didn't want to win by yelling. She wanted to win with truth. And she did. By the time she arrived at Prairie View A&M, people already knew her name, not because of trendy clothes or social media popularity, but because she had a way of confronting people that didn't leave them angry. It left them stunned. The South Dallas in her never faded. It followed her into classrooms, into courtrooms, and eventually to Capitol Hill. You could see it in how she styled her hair, in the questions she asked that made others uncomfortable, in the names she remembered, that others overlooked. People warned her to soften her approach. "Don't come off too strong," they'd whisper before meetings. "Keep your look subtle. Don't talk about where you're from like it's something to be proud of." But she didn't dial it back. She paid closer attention. That pride wasn't just for her, it carried stories. Stories of girls like her who went unnoticed, of boys her age who never saw their 23rd birthday, of mothers who juggled bus routes and work shifts just to attend parent-teacher conferences. So when J.D. Vance threw that word at her on national television, he wasn't just attacking her. He was disrespecting every Sunday hair press, every after-school shift, every milk crate bookshelf in every South Dallas home. But childhood lessons don't always prepare you for what it feels like when it happens in front of millions. By the time Jasmine Crockett completed law school, she already knew the justice system wasn't impartial. It didn't look blindly. It squinted, especially at people who resembled her. Her first job out of Texas Southern's Thurgood Marshall. School of Law was far from glamorous. No polished desks or policy briefings. She started at a small public defender's office in Shreveport, Louisiana. The air conditioning barely worked, and the coffee machine made more noise than the copier. But it was there that she truly learned how justice, real or not, was served. Every Monday, the waiting room filled with faces that reminded her of home. Cousins, uncles, classmates. Young men caught with small amounts of marijuana were getting longer sentences than white men with records. Mothers lost custody because they couldn't afford childcare. Elderly women were being charged for mail fraud they didn't understand. Jasmine never got numb to it. She just got sharper. In court, she spoke quickly, clearly, and with purpose. No theatrics, no fluff. Just the facts, delivered like a blow. "You didn't expect." Judges leaned in when she addressed the room. Even prosecutors who disliked her couldn't help but respect her dedication. Still, it wasn't only what happened inside the courtroom that defined her. The moments outside mattered too. She was once pulled over driving home from court, still dressed in a blazer and heels, briefcase in the passenger seat. The officer didn't care. He said she looked out of place, asked who the car belonged. So that's when she realized, degrees don't protect you. Respectability doesn't guarantee safety. So she stopped trying to cooperate with systems that were never built for her in the first place. Jasmine returned to Texas and opened her own law practice. She defended tenants being pushed out of their homes, cleared records for youth pulled into the system before they turned 18, and supported women leaving abusive homes with no safe place to turn. Word spread, not just because she won cases, but because she truly showed up, not in fancy suits or rehearsed talking points, but with presence, care, and honesty. She remembered her clients' children's names. She called mothers to go over documents one line at a time. She stayed late. She always followed up. And people took notice. When a city council seat opened in Dallas, people quietly began suggesting her. At first, she laughed it off. "I'm not a politician," she'd reply. But deep down, she was already building something bigger than a job. She was building community trust. Then the George Floyd protests erupted. The streets were packed with grief and frustration, full of people done being polite about injustice. Jasmine didn't just join the marches, she provided legal support to arrested protesters. She got them released. She stood in court and said what needed to be said, even when judges seemed dismissive. That changed everything. A group of local organizers came to her with an idea: run for the State House, challenge the establishment, take the fight inside. She hesitated. Running meant more cameras, more judgment, more people labeling her too loud, too black, too unrefined behind closed doors. But then she thought about her mother, about the girls in her neighborhood, about the courtroom system that worked against them. She agreed. Her campaign didn't have the largest budget, but it had energy. Volunteers knocked on doors in sweltering heat. High schoolers passed out flyers after class. Elders gave $5 bills from envelopes meant for food. She won. And then she won again. Eventually, she made it to the U.S. Congress, where her voice would carry even further. But even there, she wasn't fully accepted. The halls of Congress weren't built with people like her in mind. She noticed the extra looks, the repeated ID checks, the side comments when she wore her natural curls or asked firm questions during hearings. They tried to reshape her, make her less challenging, more comfortable. But Jasmine kept showing up, as herself, a woman from South Dallas with courtroom experience and a sharp memory. That's what made her a force. Still, no diploma, no title, no legislative win could shield her from what was coming. After the broadcast ended, the lights dimmed, and everyone walked off set as if nothing had just happened on live television. The producers acted like they hadn't heard it. The makeup assistant gave Jasmine a brief smile and quickly walked away. Even the host avoided eye contact. Jasmine slowly removed her mic. Her hands were calm, but her stomach churned. She'd been insulted before, in courtrooms, online, even by other lawmakers. But never like that, not that word. Not at that moment. Not spoken with such casual cruelty in front of millions. "You're just being ghetto." It wasn't just the word. It was how effortlessly it came out. Like it had been sitting on the tip of his tongue, waiting for the right moment. He said it without hesitation, like he wasn't worried. Like he thought it would shut her down. Maybe even earn him some laughs from viewers. But this time it landed differently. Because he didn't attack her point. He attacked who she was. He didn't say, "You're wrong." He went after her identity, her background, the stereotype. Jasmine sat quietly in the back of the rideshare, heading to her hotel, replaying the clip on her phone. It had already been posted, edited into a neat, sharp 30-second viral moment. Her name was trending again. Her phone buzzed non-stop with texts, tags, and shares. She scrolled through them. Some were supportive. Others were cruel. One tweet stood out: "This is why we don't let them on panels." That one stung more than the original insult. Back in her hotel room, she kicked off her shoes and finally let herself breathe. The space felt too quiet, too cold. She turned on the TV just to fill the silence, flipping through news stations. On one, commentators were already breaking down the moment. One said she'd taken it too personally. Another smirked and said, The word ghetto has changed meaning over time. She muted the screen. It would have been easy to issue a statement. Her team was texting her. We can draft something now. But Jasmine didn't want to respond quickly. Not this time. Instead, she sat at the edge of the bed and replayed her own words in her mind. You hear ghetto, but I hear South Dallas. She didn't raise her voice, didn't assign blame, didn't walk out. She responded with calm, clarity, and substance. Now she had to decide how much more to say. Jasmine pulled out a yellow notepad she always carried, an old habit from her. Trial preparation days. She began jotting down thoughts, not as bullet points, but as fragments. Why is it considered ghetto when I speak plainly, but seen as genuine when he yells? Why must I dress like I'm going to church to be treated with respect? Why are we still pretending that coded language doesn't exist? She didn't sleep that night, not from anger, but from a sense of duty. She knew too many young girls were watching. Too many teachers would show that clip in classrooms the next day. Too many mothers would sit their daughters down and say, "This is why you must always keep your voice steady, no matter what's said to you." And she hated that, because no man, senator or not, should have the power to define someone in a moment and expect silence in return. By morning, her inbox was overflowing. Civil rights lawyers, reporters, even a retired librarian wrote to her, "You gave us the words we've never been able to find." She sat by the window, watching the sunrise over Los Angeles, and decided she would speak again, but not the way people expected. Not through a sound bite, not a social media thread, not a carefully scripted press event. She would speak in her own voice, one shaped by barbershop talks, kitchen table debates, and conversations on the city bus. Because this moment wasn't about clapping back anymore. It was about drawing a line and keeping it firm. But going viral comes with consequences, especially for a black woman. Some thought she'd step away for a while, let the moment fade, let public outrage settle like it always had. A few advisors even quietly suggested staying quiet might be the wiser move. Let the news cycle handle it, one said. Don't give it more fuel. But Jasmine had learned a key lesson long ago, both in courtrooms and in community centers. Silence doesn't shield you. It just gives others the space to rewrite your story. And this time, she wasn't going to allow that. By the second day, news platforms had already shaped the narrative a dozen different ways. A conservative blog led with, "Crockett overreacts, plays race card on live TV." A primetime anchor used air quotes while calling her aggressive. On social media, edited clips cut out the insult entirely, reframing her response as a random outburst, but they had miscalculated something. People were watching the full video, not just highlights, not just the spin. And in it, they saw a woman remain composed after being disrespected. They saw control, dignity, and quiet intensity. By day 3, something surprising began to unfold. Individuals who usually stayed away from political debate began to speak up. A retired judge from Des Moines posted on Facebook, "If you think Jasmine Crockett was out of line, you've never sat in a courtroom where black women must smile through disrespect." In Fresno, a high school principal played the clip in a civics class, asking students to reflect. Half the girls quoted Jasmine's words about her mother, food stamps in her purse, dignity in her stride. A young activist in Albuquerque stitched the video on TikTok and said, "I don't know her personally, but this moment felt like it was for us." Then, celebrities joined the conversation. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "Don't let anyone shame you for where you come from." Congresswoman Crockett, we see you. An actor posted on Instagram, "This is why representation matters. She showed more grace than I ever could have." But what meant the most were the messages that kept pouring into her inbox. Long, heartfelt stories from women who had been called ghetto, loud, unprofessional, too much. One woman wrote, "I work in HR. I adjust how I speak every day just to be accepted. Watching you stand your ground brought me to tears in the break room." Another message came from a grandmother in Mississippi. She never completed school, but raised 3 daughters who all became educators. "You reminded me of them," she wrote. "You reminded me that holding your head high is still an act of resistance." But not everyone was supportive. In some circles, the backlash grew stronger. Conservative voices accused her of using identity politics as a weapon. Some ridiculed her for speaking about her background, as if taking pride in where you come from is somehow a weakness. Then came the quiet pushback. A congressional aide leaked that multiple lawmakers were privately discussing her temperament. Another insider claimed she might be seen as too divisive for future leadership positions. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen this pattern before. In law, in politics, in everyday life. Black women weren't allowed to react. They were expected to absorb, endure, and move on. Quietly. If they pushed back, even with facts, they were labeled angry. If they smiled through it, they were accused of acting. But Jasmine wasn't acting. She was coping and doing so publicly. Her team arranged an interview, not with a national network, but with a local Fort Worth station, a place tied to her childhood, where she used to visit cousins. She picked that outlet deliberately. This wasn't just a national issue. It was personal. When asked about the backlash, Jasmine didn't deflect. "I've been told my entire life that I'm too much," she said. "Too direct, too emotional, too loud, too black, too ghetto, and I'm done saying sorry for any of it." She leaned in slightly. Not for effect, but to be clear. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they need to ask themselves why. But the real shift came 3 days after the event, when she chose to address the public directly. Jasmine Crockett sat in a small, sunlit room with a basic webcam, no ring light, and a chipped ceramic mug at her side. No glam squad. No script, just her voice, a wooden chair, and the message she needed to share. Unfiltered. The video opened without music or polish. "Before I say anything," she began, "I want to be clear. I wasn't planning to respond like this. But I've read your messages. I've felt your stories. And this moment doesn't just belong to me anymore. It wasn't a press statement. It wasn't a rebuttal. It felt more like a real conversation, like talking at the kitchen table. After life has hit you hard and you're not sure whether to cry or keep making dinner." She never mentioned J.D. Vance. Not once. She didn't need to. "I've heard words like ghetto, unprofessional, angry my whole life," she said. "And I used to believe that if I dressed properly, spoke softly, earned the degrees, won the seats, one day those words would stop following me. But they don't. They just arrive in better packaging." She paused. The silence felt intentional. "I wasn't offended because I've never been ghetto. I was offended because I have. And I know exactly what that word means when it's said like that. It's not just a description. It's a trap. A way to clip someone's wings before they've had a chance to fly." The responses flooded in. Thousands every minute. Teachers writing about how their students reacted. Mothers sharing the clip with their daughters. Even men admitted they hadn't realized how deeply that word could wound. Until now. But what made her words resonate even more was that she didn't just defend herself. She opened the door to something bigger. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said near the end. "I'm asking for truth. Because until we're honest about who gets labeled and why, we're just disguising the same old disrespect with new words." The video reached 1 million views in less than 2 hours. By sunset, youth groups at churches were showing it. Nurses in Milwaukee watched it together during their break. It aired on sports radio, entered classrooms, and landed in family text threads. It had grown beyond politics. It became part of the culture. The next morning, a pastor in Cleveland gave a sermon titled "Dignity in the Fire," inspired entirely by Jasmine's words. A hairstylist in Detroit told a local reporter, "This woman said what we've all been holding back." And it wasn't just that she said it, she made it clear. In Tallahassee, a youth basketball coach paused practice, gathered his players, and played the clip over a Bluetooth speaker. "This," he told them, "is how you carry yourself when you're under fire." Even journalists who hadn't paid much attention before began quoting her. But none of that was how Jasmine knew it had truly landed. She knew because of a single text message. It came from Clarice, a woman in Amarillo. No checkmark, no social media following, just a screenshot of her 12-year-old daughter standing at the dinner table holding a printed version of Jasmine's words. "She's using it for her school speech," the message said. "Thank you for saying it out loud." And at that moment, sitting in her office, Jasmine felt it. Not pride, not even relief. Responsibility. Because when you speak like that, when you stand your ground with dignity and let your words carry beyond the moment, it stops being about winning a debate. It becomes about who's listening and who gains strength from your courage. She leaned back, folded her hands, and let herself breathe. Not because it was done, but because it was only just starting. What followed wasn't a headline, it was a shift. At first, J.D. Vance shrugged it off. No apology, no clarification. In fact, the next morning during a radio appearance, he doubled down. People are too sensitive nowadays, he said. If that offended her, maybe politics isn't for her. He tried to turn it into a toughness narrative, suggesting he was simply blunt, direct, and she had misunderstood. But this was no simple political stumble. It had become a cultural moment, and the public wasn't forgetting. By week's end, it wasn't just voters who were watching. Sponsors of his upcoming book tour began pulling out. A university in Oregon quietly canceled a speaking event, citing concerns from the community. A Seattle tech conference removed him from a keynote session. One organizer even tweeted, "We can't invite black women to speak on our platforms, then host someone who disrespects them on national television." His team scrambled. They issued a vague 3-line statement saying he respects his colleagues and regrets any confusion, but the damage had already started. And this time, it wasn't just about offense. It was about what his remarks exposed, and what they revealed about the spaces where voices like Jasmine's are constantly forced to prove their worth. Behind the scenes, congressional aides began leaking details about internal fallout. In one private session, a senior advisor reportedly told him, "You've made things harder for all of us. This won't blow over." Then something unusual happened. 2 of his fellow Republicans issued separate statements condemning the remarks. They didn't name him directly, but emphasized the need for respectful discourse, and urged caution with language that carried racial undertones or dismissed others. It wasn't a tidal wave of criticism, but enough to show that support beneath him was cracking. More than media headlines, it was the everyday people who kept the momentum alive. In Ohio, constituents began sending letters, not only to his office but to local newspapers. A high school senior wrote an op-ed in the Toledo Blade titled, "Why My Congressman Should Apologize to Jasmine Crockett. I've grown up hearing people call the way I talk or move ghetto," she wrote. "But no one ever explains what that means. They just use it to make us feel smaller. What Jasmine Crockett did was remind me I don't have to shrink." The article spread quickly. J.D. Vance for once went silent. His public appearances were reduced. Press interviews were declined. He stopped posting on Twitter. And though his core base remained loyal, the wider public mood had shifted. This moment stayed with people in a way he hadn't expected, because it wasn't just about what he said. It was about what it exposed. People were tired of watching black women in leadership bear the burden of being composed, intelligent, and respectful, only to be dismissed with a single word, meant to belittle them. As for Jasmine, she didn't gloat. No memes, no press demands, she stayed on message. She continued her work and kept showing up. When reporters approached her during a press gaggle and asked if she had anything to say to J.D. Vance, she glanced up from her folder and said calmly, "I already said it, and I said it clearly the first time." Then she walked away. But the ripple had already hit him, and no spin could make people unsee that moment. No silence could erase what had been exposed. The label he tried to use against her ended up reflecting back on him, not because of one comment, but because it finally brought a pattern into focus. Jasmine didn't stop to celebrate. She redirected her attention. 2 weeks later, Jasmine Crockett stood in front of a group of high school girls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. No media, no coverage, just metal folding chairs in a gym that smelled faintly of floor cleaner and vending machine popcorn. The air. Girls showed all kinds of reactions. Curious, unsure, distracted. Some whispered, playing with their braids, barely paying attention. But Jasmine knew something from experience. Young people can always tell when someone's faking it. So she didn't. She began with, "I'm not here to lecture you. I'm not here to be the woman you saw on TV. I'm here because I've sat where you are, in a room where people assume you're not paying attention." That made them listen. She shared her story of growing up in South Dallas, of being the only one in the courtroom who looked like her, of being interrupted in meetings and receiving condescending smiles. And yes, she spoke about the moment J.D. Vance called her ghetto on national television. The room went silent. A girl in the back raised her hand. "How did you not curse him?" "Out." Her tone was part playful, part respectful. The gym filled with quiet laughter. Jasmine smiled gently. "Because I wasn't talking to him," she replied. "I was talking to you. To every girl who's ever been told to lower her voice, to be smaller, to smile more. If I had reacted with anger, they'd have ignored what I said and focused on how I said it. So I gave them words they couldn't dismiss." Another student, Isabel, asked what she would tell her younger self. Jasmine looked at the many faces before her, each different, in shade and background, and said, "I'd tell myself that you don't earn respect by changing who you are. You claim it by standing as you are." The students clapped. Some even stood. Afterward, a girl named Kiara approached quietly, while others took selfies or hovered near the snack table. She didn't want a picture. She just pulled out a notebook and held it up. "I write poems," she said, "but I stopped because someone told me they sounded too ghetto." Jasmine flipped through one of the pages. It was raw, honest, and powerful. "Kiara," she said softly, "if that's what ghetto sounds like, the world needs to hear more of it." They hugged. No cameras captured it. No viral post followed. But that quiet moment was exactly why Jasmine came. Later that night on the flight back to Washington, Jasmine thought again about the word ghetto. It had been used to insult, to limit, to shame. But something had shifted. That word also started a conversation people had long avoided. Respectability politics had always been a delicate balance. Dress a certain way, speak a certain way, act a certain way. And maybe, just maybe, you'd be accepted. But what if the space you were trying to enter wasn't even built with you in mind? What if every time you reached for approval, you were asked to leave your identity behind? That's what J.D. Vance failed to understand. His comment wasn't just about speech or appearance. It was about identity. He wanted her to shrink. Instead, she stood firmer. And in doing so, others who'd been made to feel small their entire lives stood taller too. Not because she had influence, but because she offered something more powerful: permission. Permission to speak in your natural voice, to wear what your mother raised you in, to show up fully in places that never expected you, to hold your ground without apology. But one more moment still lay ahead. Live television, again, almost exactly a year later. Another panel invitation, same network, same polished table, and yes, same co-panelist. J.D. Vance was scheduled again. The topic this time was national housing policy, but everyone knew what would draw attention. The producers didn't say it aloud, but it was clear from the segment plan: Crockett versus Vance, round 2. Her team paused. "You don't owe them anything," one advisor said. "You already made your statement." But Jasmine saw it differently. "This isn't about him," she said. "It's about every girl who's still watching." She entered the studio in a burnt orange suit, confident and unapologetic. Her hair was styled in neat coils, pinned back just enough to show the gold studs in her ears. There was no dramatic entrance or flashy comeback, just presence and a message she carried like protection. The show began. The host made polite conversation, but the underlying tension was clear. J.D. kept glancing at her sideways, maybe anticipating a clash, maybe expecting a moment to grab headlines. But Jasmine wasn't there for drama. The discussion focused on policy for a while. She explained the data, pointed out inconsistencies, and held her ground. Her voice remained calm, but her words carried weight. Then came the moment. Mid-sentence, J.D. leaned in and said, "Look, Congresswoman Crocker, I'm sure your community cares, but I don't think making this emotional helps." That was it. Not as harsh as ghetto, but the message was the same, dismissive and coded for a wider audience. Jasmine took a breath and, without changing her posture, replied, "You keep calling it emotional when I talk about housing because you've never had to live beside a payday loan place and a liquor store instead of a supermarket. You see emotion, I do experience." The room went still. The host tried to shift topics, but the moment had already made its mark. JD leaned back, visibly unsettled, and had no response. The clip hit social media in less than 10 minutes. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she held the space. She didn't shout. She didn't put on a show. She simply refused to be overlooked. Later, after the show, reporters asked if she had any comments about Senator Vance. She smiled and said, "I think the record speaks for itself." That evening, Jasmine sat in her D.C. office checking emails. One stood out. It was from a father in Missouri. He wrote, "My daughter watched your segment tonight. She told me she wants to speak like you, calm, strong, and clear. Thank you." She read it again, because this was never just about debating J.D. Vance. It was always about something deeper. Changing what authority looks like, redefining who gets taken seriously, showing that grace isn't a weakness, and staying composed doesn't mean staying quiet. Jasmine hadn't answered an insult. She had redefined the rules, not by being louder, but by refusing to shrink. So next time someone watches a woman like Jasmine Crockett, direct, bold, and self-assured, and thinks, she's doing too much, maybe they'll remember that moment, that response, that presence, and maybe they'll realize, it's not too much. That's leadership. If you believe your voice has value, even when it trembles, subscribe, because silence has never brought change.